In this video, we'll look at the basics of using the X32 sound desk and mixing both the front of house and foldback speakers. First, we'll take a look at the basic layout of the desk, and then what's involved in mixing for church. This is our mixing desk, a Behringer X32. Audio is first sent to the desk by a source such as the lectern mic, the Proclaim computer, or the keyboard is then modified by the desk and sent to one of the various output channels, like the front of house speakers, the foldback speakers, or the live stream. These audio signals are sent to channels on the desk. You can find the first 16 channels on the bottom left-hand section. The channels are grouped by color, with the presenter mics being purple, the vocal mics being yellow, and then instruments in blue. First, there's the wireless handheld mic, which might be used by the service leader for church news or for interviews. Then there's the lapel mic, which is the small clip-on mic often used by the preacher. The headset mic, also used by preachers. The eagle microphone, which is sometimes used by Bible readers in the 8 a.m. service. Then the mic mounted on the communion table. And then the lectern mic, which is used for Bible reading, prayers, and other parts of the service. Next are the 4 vocal mics, labelled red, white, yellow, and green. These correspond to the tape wrapped around the microphone and the microphone stand. Next are the instruments, 2 channels for the acoustic guitars, the mic on the electric guitar amp, 2 channels for the keyboard, a left and right, and then a channel for the output from the bass amp. To the left of these channels, there's buttons that will switch between pages of channels, which you'll learn more about a little later. On the right, there's additional channels with their own pages that we'll discuss later in the video as well. Above the channels, you'll find various sections such as the preamp, compressor, and EQ sections that will modify the sound in a channel. There's also a screen where you can view and edit more detailed information about a channel or the desk. You can edit these parameters using a series of rotary dials found below the screen. On the right-hand side of the desk, there's a series of sections that control parameters that are global to the desk, rather than specific to a channel. There's also the mains fader, which controls the level sent to the front of house speakers. In this video, we'll just go over the basics, so you won't learn about what each of these sections does in detail. Let's start by taking a closer look at the channels on the bottom left-hand side of the board. Each channel has the same set of basic controls. At the top, there's the select button. To modify a channel's properties, you need to have that channel selected. You do this by pressing the select button at the top of the channel. It will be green when pressed, showing that you're currently modifying that channel's properties. Next, you can see some meters for the channel. This shows the input signal level to the channel, allowing you to quickly see if there's too little or too much signal coming into the channel. You'll learn more about setting the correct signal levels when we discuss gain. Next is the solo button. Pressing solo will send the output of that channel to the headphones, so you can listen to the audio signal. You can also solo multiple channels at a time, or you can solo an output channel. Then there's the channel name and icon, which will tell you what signal that channel contains. For example, the lectern mic or the bass guitar. You can see that they are also color-coded, with the presenter mics in purple, then vocals in yellow, and instruments in blue. There is then a mute button. This mutes the channel, ensuring its audio is not sent anywhere else in the desk or to any outputs. Lastly, there is the channel fader. This controls the output volume of the signal, either into the main output, which is our front of house speakers, or into another channel, which we will cover in the foldback section. Moving the fader up will make the channel louder, and moving it down quieter. You can see 16 channels of audio here on the left-hand side, which represents most of our audio inputs. The X32 has another 16 inputs, which you can see by going to the second page of channels, which will display channels 17 to 32. These buttons on the left will switch between the 4 pages available. Pressing the second one goes to page 2, and you can see all of the channels update to show 17 to 32. Here you'll find our drum and room mics. There's another 2 pages below these, but they're out of the scope of this video. As well as channels, the desk has various sections, which represent different functions you can perform. Each section is labeled. For example, there's config/preamp section and the equalizer section. Each section has some relevant controls and a view button to bring up that section on the screen. You can modify the parameters for the section either by the controls within the section or the controls below the screen when viewing that section. These sections on the left relate to the currently selected channel, while the others control other functions within the desk. To the right of our 16 input channels, you can see another 5 channels in what's known as the right-hand side fader bank. These 5 channels are called DCAs, which stands for Digitally Controlled Amplifiers. They control the level for multiple channels at once. There's DCAs for the presenter mics, the vocal mics, the band, and the computer, each one color-coded to match the channels it controls. Adjusting the level for one of these DCAs is the same as adjusting the level for all of the channels it's assigned to, so moving it up or down can be a quick way to adjust the level of multiple channels at once. You can also mute a DCA to mute all of the channels it's assigned to. The right-hand side fader bank has multiple pages just like the left-hand side one. On the second page, you can see channels for all of our foldback speakers. Adjusting these channel faders changes the overall volume of that foldback speaker. There's also pages 3 and 4, which we won't go over at the moment. Now that we've covered the basics of the layout and controls available on a desk, let's take a look at what's involved in mixing for a Sunday service. The first thing you need to do when you come to the desk is load one of our saved scenes. These are saved configurations of all of the parameters in the desk, such as the volume and pan of each instrument. The scene that you load forms the starting point for your mix. To load a scene, you can press View on the Scene section to bring up the configuration on the screen. You'll see that there is multiple pages of the Scene section, which you can move through with the page buttons on the bottom right. Pressing page right once will go from the queue to the scenes page, where you can see a list of all of our saved scenes. You can read the name and description of the scenes to choose which one best suits what you're mixing, which in most cases is the top All Services scene. To change which scene is selected, you can rotate the first dial underneath the screen and then press it to load that scene. A confirmation dialog will come up, and you can then press the page right button, also labeled Yes, to confirm that you'll load the scene. Now that the scene is loaded, you can start the process of mixing. The next thing you want to do is make sure you mute any channel which isn't being used and unmute any used channels. For example, unmuting the channels according to the band that week, like the electric guitar and the appropriate vocal mics. This ensures they can be heard in the room, in their foldback, and in the live stream. It's also important to mute any microphones when they're not being used within the service, especially the presenter mics during music. For example, it's important to mute the lectern mic during music, as otherwise it will be picking up lots of signal from the band and putting it back into the room and the live stream. The next step is to set an appropriate gain level for each input. Gain is the level of amplification done to the incoming audio signal in decibels, with the goal of adding enough gain so the input level is in a desired range. This is because all of the processing done to the audio expects a certain level of signal. You can think of setting the gain as setting the input level of the signal to the desk, while the fader changes the output level. The gain level set in the scene will provide a rough starting point, but it's important to make sure that it's correct. To change a channel's gain, you first select a channel you want to modify Then press the View button on the preamp section of the desk. You can then see the incoming signal level on the left side of the screen. The second rotary knob below the screen then sets the gain applied. You want to adjust the gain until the signal is averaging -18 decibels, up to around -12. The level will naturally change with the dynamics of a vocal or an instrument, but make sure that the gain is around this level during an average or louder volume section. You can set the gain during the band practice for instruments and the vocalists, going through each channel to ensure it has an appropriate level. For the presenter mics, you'll need to set the gain for each person as they start speaking into the mic, as the gain level for each speaker will vary. It's important to make sure each band member has adequate foldback, so they can hear what they need to in order to play or sing their best. This is done by adjusting the levels of each channel going to the 4 foldback speakers in the stage area, as well as the in-ears. To adjust the level in the foldback speakers, you can use the right-hand channel bank where the second page will show output buses. These buses contain the signal that is sent to the speakers. To change the mix in the speaker, or foldback bus, you select the output bus and then press the Sends on Fader button, which is between the fader banks. When Sends on Fader is enabled, the channel faders will adjust the level going into that selected bus, rather than into the main or front of house output. For example, to add more keys and vocals into the Vocal 1 output, you would select the appropriate output bus, press Sends on Fader, and then increase the level of the keyboard and vocal channels. To then go back to mixing the main or front of house output, you press Sends on Fader again. After you've set the gain correctly and mixed foldback, you can start mixing the front of house speakers. You can use the master or main fader here on the right to set the level of signal sent to the speakers. We normally have it set to -20 dB, which will give you a starting point to mix from. After turning up the front of house fader, you can get an overall level for the vocals and band by using the DCAs that we talked about earlier. These adjust the volume for multiple channels at once, allowing you to get a rough balance between the instruments and the vocals. Then, using the channel faders, making sure that Sends on Fader is disabled, you can adjust the volume of each instrument and vocal to taste. There is no rules as to where each fader should be, as it's a matter of taste for each mixer to determine what they think sounds best. This is a skill that takes time and practice to develop, but we'll cover some general tips to help you get started. In a live sound scenario, your mix starts with the stage sound, such as the volume of the drums, amps, and foldback speakers. Your role in mixing front of house is then to add levels to this starting point to create a good mix to the rest of the room. It's important to intently listen to the sound in the room, what you can hear and what you can't hear. Go through each instrument, turning the fader up and down until it sits well in the mix. This is a continuous cycle, as changes on one instrument affect your perception of another. Rather than always turning up a channel, often resulting in the same but louder mix, listen for any instruments that could be quieter, as they might be masking the sound of other channels. It's important to make sure the vocals are always at the front of the mix, clear and intelligible over the band. If any of the stage sound, such as the specific amp or the drums, is too loud and making it difficult to mix front of house, talk to the band member about turning down. They too want to make sure the mix in the room is sounding its best, and will be happy to accommodate reasonable requests. They can't hear what it sounds like in the room, so it's the mix engineer's job to work with the band to get a great sound. The mix will sound different throughout the room, so mix from downstairs where most of the congregation is wherever possible, using the provided iPad or an app on your phone. The mix doesn't need to stay static throughout the service. Some songs might work better with different mixes, or even different sections of the same song. The front of house mix is separate to our live stream mix, so feel free to change the levels to whatever sounds best in the room. Now that you know the basics of the desk and mixing, there's some slightly more advanced features you might want to use. The first of these is mute groups, which are to the right of the master fader. These just mute multiple channels at once. Mute group 1 will mute our room mics, while mute group 2 will mute the vocal reverb, which is handy for when a vocalist is talking rather than singing. In the top right of the board, there's the monitor section where you can adjust the level of any solo channels in your headphones, and then the talkback section. Pressing and holding the Talk A button here and speaking into a microphone below the screen allows you to talk to the band members through the Foldback speakers. Lastly, the live stream comes out of 2 channels on page 4 of the right hand side fader bank. These are labelled Stream Left and Stream Right. If you solo these, you can hear the live stream mix in your headphones, or if you mute them, you'll mute the entire live stream sound. In this video, you learnt the basics of our X32 sound desk and mixing for church, including loading one of our save scenes, muting and unmuting mics as they're used, setting gain so it's sitting at the desired -18 dB average, mixing Foldback with the Sends On Fader button, and mixing front of house by listening and modifying the levels of each channel. If you have any further questions about mixing for church or our sound desk, feel free to leave a comment below.